She slapped him across the face, then froze when she realized why he had kissed her. Everyone thought he was crazy, but that one act of madness just saved her life. This is the story of Tony, a gatekeeper at a sprawling estate in suburban California, and his boss Miranda, a self-made billionaire whose empire seemed untouchable. On a chilly dawn in March, Tony arrived for his shift at the wrought iron gate of the Blackwood estate. The air smelled of dew and freshly cut lawn. He noticed a black SUV humming to a stop in front of the gate, the engine's growl low and urgent. He opened the gate as usual, not knowing that inside, the world was about to change. Miranda stepped out, sharp-suited, phone in hand, the click of her heels on the marble driveway echoing through the dawn. Tony greeted her with his usual, "Good morning, Miss Blackwood," unaware of the tremor in her voice, the tremor hidden behind her steel-bright smile. 2 weeks earlier, Tony had overheard fragments of conversation at the guardhouse. Audit. Risky deal. Cover this up. He didn't understand it all. He just knew something felt off. He'd offered to stay late one night, coffee in hand, watching shadows move across the estate walls, his heart echoing with a question, "What am I protecting here?" On this morning, Miranda leaned on the gatepost and closed her eyes for a moment, a deep exhale escaping her lips. Tony frowned, concerned. "Everything all right, Ms. Blackwood?" he asked. She nodded, forcing a smile. But as she stepped through, the gate creaked shut, and the black SUV vanished into the trees. Tony's world shifted. Inside the mansion, Miranda's phone rang. She answered, voice low. "Yes, I know." Pause. "I want the files today. Don't make me regret trusting you." The click of the call ended, and she nearly collapsed, her knees buckling before Tony found her and caught her arm. His strong hands steadied her, confusion and fear in his eyes. "Let's get you inside," he said quietly. She nodded, and Tony guided her toward the house. Later that afternoon, Tony was sitting in the guardhouse when he heard the sound. Smash. He bolted outside to see a window of the mansion shattering. 2 masked figures sprinted from the front door, dragging something heavy. Without thinking, Tony left his post, chased them across the lawn, and tackled one of them. His mind raced. You'll never guess why they were here. They were not there for art or cash. They were here for Miranda. Miranda, inside, lay unconscious in the grand hall, poisoned almost silently through a glass of sparkling water delivered just before lunch. The intruders had sniffed vulnerability. They knew she wouldn't fight back in time. Tony fought with everything he had. The intruders got away with her briefcase, but Tony held one of them until the police arrived. In the hospital later that evening, Miranda opened her eyes. Tony sat by her bed, fingers intertwined, the faint hum of machines a backdrop. "Tony," she said, voice barely more than a whisper. "Thank you." He squeezed her hand. "I didn't do much," he said. But he had, and she knew it. 6 months later, when the investigation revealed a conspiracy within her company's board, documents discovered in that stolen briefcase exposing corruption that would have ruined her, Miranda publicly thanked Tony. She promoted him, gave him a role he never asked for, head of security and ethics for the company. He'd gone from gatekeeper to guardian of the empire. If that was how it ended, fine. But here comes the twist. At the celebration dinner, Miranda stood to speak. "Tony," she said, "you did more than save my life. You saved our future." She looked across the room at her board members. "And if there's one message I have tonight, it's this. True loyalty is invisible until the moment you need it most." In that moment, Tony realized he didn't just earn her trust, he changed the narrative of his own life. The boy who greeted visitors at a gate became the man who safeguarded an empire. And you? Think about this. If you were Tony, standing at that gate at dawn, would you have walked away or would you have stepped in? And if you were Miranda, would you have trusted someone like Tony or dismissed him like so many do? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Stay with me till the end, because when you discover why he kissed her, your heart will never forget. What could make a man risk his job, his dignity, and even his life for a woman who barely noticed him? What could drive someone like Tony, a quiet man who spent years guarding the gates of another person's empire, to cross a line no one expected him to? Was it love, loyalty, or something far more complicated? He wasn't a hero. Not in the way people think of heroes. He was just a man who knew what it meant to be invisible, until the day he wasn't. And that kiss, that single forbidden kiss, wasn't what the world thought it was. It wasn't desire, it wasn't rebellion. It was survival. But how did it come to that moment? What secret did Tony see that no one else noticed? A glance, a whisper, a strange exchange that didn't add up? Did he sense danger before anyone else? Or was it pure instinct that made him act when everyone else froze? Behind the mansion walls, something was unraveling. Trust, loyalty, truth. The kind of secrets that don't just ruin reputations, they destroy lives. And Tony, the man everyone overlooked, stood right at the center of it all. So before we uncover what really happened, tell me this. What would you do if you saw something that could cost you everything, but save someone else's life? Would you stay quiet to keep your job, or speak up and risk it all? Think about it, because before this story ends, you might start to wonder what kind of person you really are. Before that day, Tony was just a name on a uniform. To Madame Remy, he was invisible, another servant behind the iron gate. But Tony's life wasn't always this way. There was a time when he wore a clean shirt to an office, not a security badge. He once sat behind a desk, fixing computers and writing code that solved other people's problems. He was proud of his mind, proud of the life he built from nothing. But life has a way of changing direction without warning. When the company he worked for shut down, Tony was left with nothing but a few savings, a pile of rejection letters, and a promise to himself that he wouldn't give up. For months he searched, walking miles each day in the California heat, his resume folded and worn from use. Rent came due and then overdue, until one night he found himself on a sidewalk, sitting beside a single box of his belongings, staring at the stars through tears he refused to let fall. That night he whispered, "I just need one more chance." A week later, he saw a small posting on a faded notice board outside a local cafe. Security guard needed. Blackwood Estate. The pay was low, but it was something. He borrowed a shirt, cleaned his shoes, and showed up early, hoping no one would see how nervous he was. That's how Tony's story at the mansion began, as a man who had once fixed machines, now reduced to guarding gates. And Madame Remy? She was the kind of woman newspapers called unshakable. A billionaire entrepreneur who built an empire from her father's bankrupt factory. Every morning she arrived at her mansion in silence, her posture straight, her eyes cold and distant. She was respected by her staff but never loved. Behind her confidence she carried something no one saw: loneliness. Her husband had left years ago. Her friends were business partners who spoke in contracts, not comfort. Every evening she dined alone at a table meant for 10, her phone lighting up with notifications but never a message that said, "How are you?" Her world was control, perfection, and discipline, and in that world, Tony was nothing more than part of the scenery. He opened the gates when she left, closed them when she returned, and disappeared into silence. She barely looked at him, and yet every morning, Tony would greet her with quiet respect. "Good morning, ma'am." No reply, just the sound of heels fading away. But what she didn't know was that Tony noticed things. He noticed how she touched her wrist every time she was anxious. He noticed how her laughter never reached her eyes. He noticed that sometimes she sat in her car for minutes before stepping out, as if preparing herself to face a house that felt emptier each day. He didn't pity her. He simply understood her in ways no one else cared to. For months they lived in parallel worlds separated by an iron gate, one built on pride, the other on survival. Yet fate has a strange way of forcing two unlikely souls to collide. And when they finally did, it wasn't because of wealth or ambition, it was because of something far more powerful: truth. So as you listen, ask yourself, how many people do we walk past every day without seeing who they really are? How many Tonys live around us carrying stories we never stop to ask about? And how many Remys hide behind success, pretending they don't need anyone at all? Sometimes the people we overlook the most are the ones destiny sends to save us. It started with whispers, a car that followed Madame Remy every evening, headlights dimmed. Tony noticed, but said nothing. Who would believe a gateman? Each night as he closed the heavy iron gates behind her, he caught a glimpse of the same dark sedan parked down the hill. No plates visible, no movement, just a presence, watching. He mentioned it once, gently, when she stopped at the gate one morning. "Ma'am, I think someone's been—" But before he could finish, she cut him off. "Tony, your job is to open the gate, not to follow my imagination." Her tone was sharp, her pride unbending. And Tony, embarrassed, lowered his head and stepped aside. She drove off without looking back. That evening the rain fell hard. Thunder rolled across the valley as Tony stood beneath his small guard shelter, clutching his jacket close. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Every instinct in him, the same instincts that once helped him fix problems others ignored, screamed that danger was near. He checked the cameras, but one feed was dead. The cable had been cut. He wrote it off as a storm issue, but deep down, he knew better. A few days later, he found something at the base of the gate, a folded piece of paper weighed down by a stone. The handwriting was uneven, rushed. "She'll pay for what she did." Tony's hands trembled as he read it. He turned to look up at the mansion, its lights glowing faintly through the rain, and he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He showed the note to Madame Remy the next morning. She frowned, skimmed it, and scoffed. "You think this is real? People like me get threats every week. It's part of being successful." She dropped the paper on her desk like it was a grocery list. Tony wanted to argue, but her eyes told him to stop. Pride was her shield. She'd rather face danger than admit fear. From that day, Tony stopped sleeping well. He stayed later than his shift required, watching, listening. Once, near midnight, he heard the faint crunch of gravel near the east fence. He stepped out, flashlight in hand, but saw nothing, only the glint of eyes in the dark before they vanished. He reported it to the police, but by the time they arrived, the tracks were gone. And then came that night. The night when thunder returned, louder than before. Madame Remy was hosting a private dinner with 2 guests, potential investors, men she needed to impress. Tony stood outside as the lights of the dining hall shimmered through the rain. He saw movement in the garden, a shadow crossing behind the curtains. He froze, then a sound, metal scraping against glass. His heart pounded. He grabbed his flashlight and ran toward the side entrance. Inside, chaos was seconds away. The lights flickered, and Madame Remy stood from her chair, startled. A window shattered. Tony burst through the hallway, shouting her name. But before he could explain, she turned, furious. "What are you doing here? You're out of line!" she snapped, her pride still stronger than her fear. And then he saw it. A red laser dot hovering over her chest. Tony didn't think. He didn't plan. He just acted. He shouted, "Be quiet!" And before she could react, he grabbed her face and kissed her. Gasps filled the room. The guests froze in shock. She raised her hand, ready to slap him, until the sound of glass breaking again shattered the silence. A bullet struck the wall where her head had been. The room erupted. One of the guests ducked under the table, screaming. Madame Remy's eyes widened in disbelief. Tony turned, dragging her down to the floor, shielding her with his body as another shot tore through the curtains. That single act, the kiss everyone thought was madness, had just saved her life. In the seconds that followed, security alarms wailed, the intruders fled, and Tony lay on the floor, breathing heavily, her perfume and gunpowder thick in the air. Madame Remy trembled, her hand clutching his arm, unable to speak. And outside, rain washed the blood from Tony's torn sleeve as he whispered, barely audible, "Told you someone was watching." That was the moment everything changed. The billionaire and the gateman, two worlds that were never meant to touch, were now bound by one impossible truth. He had saved her life, and no one could understand how or why. For the world, it was a scandal. For Tony, it was silence. He couldn't explain that his kiss wasn't love, it was protection. Because the moment he kissed her, a sniper's laser vanished from her chest. But no one saw that part. All they saw was a poor gateman pressing his lips against his billionaire boss in front of her guests. Within minutes, chaos turned to whispers, whispers to gossip, gossip to headlines. The gateman who kissed his boss. Cameras flashed. Security dragged Tony out of the mansion before he could speak. Madame Remy's voice, cold and shaking, echoed behind him. "You're fired." She couldn't look at him. Whether it was anger or shame, even she couldn't tell. At the police station, Tony sat on a wooden bench, wrists in cuffs, eyes staring at the cracked wall. He didn't resist, didn't argue. How could he? Who would believe a man like him? The officers laughed quietly as they read the report. "Romantic assault on employer," one muttered. Tony said nothing. His mind replayed the moment again and again. The light, the sound, her face, the bullet that never hit. He whispered to himself, "If I didn't act, she'd be gone." Meanwhile, the story spread faster than truth ever could. Online tabloids mocked him. Talk shows debated his intentions. Some called him brave, most called him insane. And Madame Remy? She locked herself inside her mansion, humiliated. Her company's board demanded an explanation. Her investors questioned her judgment. A woman known for control was suddenly the center of ridicule. She told herself Tony had crossed a line, that he had humiliated her. But every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the sound of shattering glass and the hole in the wall behind her chair. That night, she sat alone in her study, staring at the broken window Tony had shielded her from. On her desk was the same note he had shown her days earlier. "She'll pay for what she did." For the first time, her hands shook. She realized he hadn't been lying, but pride is a heavy chain. Instead of calling him, she told herself she didn't need to know more. She convinced herself that gratitude could wait. Tony spent 2 nights in a cell, his name mocked by strangers online. But he wasn't angry. He just kept asking one question. Why did they want her dead? Because the shot that missed her wasn't random. Someone had planned it, someone inside her circle. When he was finally released, it wasn't because the world believed him. It was because Madame Remy refused to press charges. Her words to the police were short, almost emotionless. Let him go. But when she hung up the phone, her eyes glistened with something she hadn't felt in years: doubt. She told herself she wanted distance, but deep down she needed answers. Who was trying to hurt her, and why? And Tony, standing outside the police station with nothing but the clothes he wore that night, looked up at the sky and whispered, "Maybe saving her was the easy part. Proving it, that's what's hard." If this story has your heart racing, comment, "I'm still watching." Let's see who's truly following till the end, because what happens next will test the meaning of loyalty itself. That's when she realized that kiss wasn't madness, it was sacrifice. The truth came quietly, piece by piece, like dawn after a storm. Days after the incident, the police uncovered fragments of a rifle hidden near the woods behind the estate. Alongside it, a burner phone, messages and payment records linking the weapon to one name: her former business partner, Richard Lang. The man who once shared her vision, her dreams, and then turned against her when greed became more valuable than loyalty. For years, he'd blamed her for cutting him out of a multi-million-dollar deal that nearly bankrupted him. And now, he had tried to settle the score the cruelest way possible. Tony's statement filled in the gaps the evidence couldn't. He told investigators about the shadow he saw near the fence, the broken camera wire, and the red light on Madame Remy's chest seconds before the glass shattered. His words matched the recovered footage from a traffic camera near the mansion that night. A car idling, lights off, in the exact spot he had described. The story that once made him a villain was slowly turning him into the only man who had seen the truth before it was too late. But the moment that changed everything wasn't in court or on the news. It happened quietly, in Madame Remy's study, 3 days later. She sat alone, eyes fixed on the CCTV monitor, as the police officer played the recovered footage. The screen flickered, showing Tony standing behind her during the dinner. Then the red dot, faint but visible, hovered over her chest. Just as it moved closer, Tony lunged forward, shouting, "Be quiet!" and pulled her into that unexpected kiss. The bullet hit the wall exactly where her head had been. Her hands trembled. She pressed pause, frozen in disbelief. The truth she had been too proud to face was now right before her eyes. Tears welled, falling onto the desk as she whispered, "He saved my life." For the first time in years, her strength broke, and behind that wall of pride was gratitude, guilt, and humility. Tony, meanwhile, had returned to his quiet life, avoiding cameras and reporters. He didn't seek fame, he just wanted peace. But fate had one last turn to make. A letter arrived at his small apartment one morning, cream envelope, gold seal. Inside, a handwritten note. "You once opened my gates. Now, I ask you to open my heart. M.R." She invited him back, not as a worker, but as a friend. When he arrived, she met him at the same gate he once guarded. No words at first, just silence, heavy with meaning. Then she said softly, "You risked everything, not for love, but for loyalty." Tony smiled faintly. "Sometimes," he replied, "the two aren't that different." And in that moment, everything that once divided them, wealth, class, pride, faded. What remained was something rare, respect born from truth. So I'll ask you this. When the world misjudges someone, do you take time to see the truth for yourself? Or do you believe the noise? Because one act of courage can be mistaken for madness, until the evidence shows it was the only thing that kept someone alive. She finally understood. Not every act of defiance is disrespect. Some are the purest form of devotion. And for the first time, she saw Tony not as a servant, but as a man of honor. The truth had cleared his name, but the world's judgment had already left its scars. The pressure, the ridicule, the sleepless nights, it all came at a cost. Tony had fallen ill shortly after his release, his body giving way to exhaustion and the stress he had carried alone. He was admitted to a small city hospital, quiet and dimly lit, where few visitors came. But one morning, as he opened his eyes, he saw a familiar silhouette standing by the door. It was Madame Remy. No guards, no assistants, just her, holding a bouquet of white lilies. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she whispered, her voice trembling, "I came to say I'm sorry." Tony tried to sit up, but she shook her head gently. "You warned me," she said, tears tracing lines down her face. "And I didn't listen. You saved my life, and I repaid you with humiliation." Her words broke something inside her, the wall of pride she had hidden behind for years. She reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. "I built an empire but lost my humanity, and you reminded me what it means to trust again." Tony looked at her, his expression calm, forgiving. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you don't owe me anything." But she insisted. She offered him a new life, a position at her company, a house, a car, everything she thought could repay what he had done. Tony smiled faintly, shaking his head. "I don't need luxury," he said. "All I ever wanted was respect." His voice was steady, humble, yet it carried the weight of a truth she would never forget. From that day, Madame Remy changed. She began to greet her staff by name, stopped to listen when they spoke, and built a foundation in Tony's honor to support workers who had once been invisible. She visited him often, not as a boss, but as a friend. And when he finally recovered, they walked together through the mansion grounds, side by side, two equal souls under the same sun. There were no cameras, no headlines, no speeches. Just quiet understanding between two people who had seen the worst of the world and still chose to believe in goodness. And perhaps that was the real victory. Not the cleared name, not the fortune, but the bridge built between pride and humility, between power and kindness. So I'll ask you, how often do we mistake loyalty for rebellion? How many people have we pushed away because their truth challenged our comfort? Sometimes, the ones who seem to defy us are the ones sent to protect us. Madame Remy learned that too late, but she never forgot it. And Tony? He went back to his post for a short while, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Each morning when she drove through those gates, she greeted him first. Not the gateman, not the worker, but, "Good morning, Tony." And he'd smile, nodding quietly. "Good morning, ma'am." Simple words, but to them, it meant everything. In a world where loyalty is rare, Tony proved that true respect sometimes hides behind the strangest actions. That single moment, a kiss that looked like defiance, became a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and the kind of love that doesn't ask for anything in return. He didn't fight for recognition. He didn't chase wealth. He simply did what was right, even when the world turned against him for it. And now I'll ask you, what would you have done if you were in his place? Would you have risked your job, your dignity, and your freedom to protect someone who barely noticed you? Would you have stayed quiet, or acted in that split second that could mean the difference between life and death? Would you have slapped him, or thanked him? Tell us in the comments below. Your voice matters here. Your opinion, your heart, your truth. And if this story touched you, share it with someone who still believes that loyalty has no price. Because in the end, Tony's story reminds us that sometimes the smallest people perform the greatest acts of courage, not for glory, but for humanity. And if you think this story was unbelievable, wait till you hear what happened in our next folktale. Another true story that will make you question what you thought you knew about love, power, and sacrifice. Subscribe for more timeless stories that touch the heart and open the mind. Until next time, remember, real heroes don't wear crowns. They simply show up when it matters most.